Hello and welcome to another episode. I'm Sian, I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm going to be talking about things that you might think are your personality that are actually a reaction to childhood trauma. So first of all, this is a complex topic because personality is thrown around. That word is used a lot, and we tend to get into these patterns in which we define ourselves and we define each other people define us in terms of our traits, our qualities, and suddenly those things become who we are. So it can be quite difficult as you're healing to kind of figure out which bits are you and which bits are stemming from your trauma, stemming from having to cope, having to adapt, and so on. So these are three, there are lots and lots of different kind of things I could have talked about today in terms of different types of personality traits, but I'm just going to run through three that I've seen are fairly common and also that are kind of, I suppose, endorsed in our society, which makes them even harder to heal from. These are qualities that we tend to think of as positive, and so therefore it's even more complex to move away from them, right? Or to really just frame them as actually a kind of long-standing trauma response. So the first one is coping exceptionally well in very stressful situations and just really excelling with when you have a lot to do and a lot going on. So this is obviously useful in a society that focuses on productivity, which is exactly what we do I'm from the UK, we definitely do that in the UK, in the US, in other parts of Europe and so on, and in different parts of the world there is a massive focus on being productive, getting things done, being efficient. And so this idea of somebody being able to kind of push through and rise to the occasion when there's a lot of stress going on is really praised. But actually, if we think about this in terms of our nervous system and how our nervous system is kind of set up and built, we are meant to notice it based on our body giving us these messages, notice when what we're doing or our environment or the expectations we have of ourselves or that are put on us by other people, when it's too much. We get signals from our body in lots of different ways, whether that's through headaches, through pain that won't go away that isn't linked to a physical, medical issue, through IBS, through a range of different physical experiences, and also just in the moment we kind of get these messages, right, where we feel overwhelmed and we feel maybe our anxiety kicks in. We're meant to pay attention to that. But if you grew up with caregivers, parents who maybe were always on the go, maybe were always busy, were always quite highly strung, who couldn't really sit down and rest properly or happily. Maybe you just had parents who were often just kind of going and not able to regulate their own nervous system and their own stress levels. Or if you grew up in a chaotic environment which was highly stressful and which kind of required you to manage and cope with this high level of stress on a regular basis, then what happens when you get those signals from your body? One, you may not hear them at all. You may have gotten to the point where you have dissociated really from your body, from your physical responses, and so you just don't hear them at all. Or maybe you hear them, but you just kind of tell them to be quiet. And then when you are reaching the level of stress that typically you ought to stop at, you ramp up and actually find a fifth gear, which lots of people don't have. So instead of at 10 p.m. you're working, you're exhausted, instead of paying attention to that, you find that fifth gear and keep working till 1 a.m. Or there are projects being offered at work and you're already at capacity, but instead of saying no, you find that in you to push through and to invite that stress in, and then you say yes to another project. So there's this kind of overriding of your instincts, of your limits, and of your own boundaries. But this can become like a personality type, right? You can tell how this maybe with people who are highly successful, who work a lot, this is going to be praised, right? This is going to be linked to their financial success, their professional success. People who do it all, kind of get it all done, this is going to be praised, right? But actually what's happening is that there's this constant overriding of boundaries. And often this leads long term, this leads to autoimmune disorders, because your body can only go so long with being ignored. So let's talk now about the next personality type, and that is being highly rational or unemotional. Now, I said earlier that these three personality types I'm going to talk about, or these traits rather, are often praised. And, you know, I haven't met many people who kind of want to lose their mind and get really upset, get really angry in front of people. I haven't met many people who like the experience of being really emotional, maybe being sad, maybe being angry. I haven't met many people who want that experience. I've met lots of people the other way who say, I want to be able to control my emotions more. I want to be less emotional. I don't want to cry randomly. I don't want to lose my temper so quickly. And so this personality trait of being rational or highly rational, there's nothing wrong with being rational, you know, but we're wanting a balance, right? But being highly rational or very unemotional, there is something that happened in childhood to make that the case, because emotions are not an option really in life. We need emotions. We need emotions in order to tell us that everything around us is okay. It's part of our instinct, isn't it? Everything around us is safe and okay. If we're blocking off our emotions, we don't get those signals when it's not okay. We need our emotions to tell us when we're being mistreated. That's anger, when our boundaries are crossed. We need that, that's really important. We need to be able to cry when something's sad. We need to be able to release, you know, tears are a natural painkiller. They release oxytocin. They help us cope when things are sad and difficult. And that's what helps us move through them and heal. And if we don't do that, it tends to come out in all sorts of ways. Again, in our body, of course, it comes out with IBS, so it comes out with difficulties with like skin conditions. Often when we're really suppressing, it kind of comes out in that way. And so yes, some people might be naturally a bit more emotional, and yes, some people might be naturally a bit more rational, but all humans need to have access to their emotions, and not just cognitively, right? This is not just about thinking, oh, I feel quite sad about that. This is about being sad, letting yourself feel that sadness, letting yourself cry, letting yourself do nothing, letting yourself be down and depressed for a few days, letting yourself be sad, not just thinking I'm sad. Now, in environments in childhood where your emotions are punished, or your emotions are ignored, dismissed, used against you, it makes sense that you are going to want to disassociate yourself from them, that you're going to want to kind of deny them and reject them and live a life of rationality instead. That feels much safer. I understand that. That feels much more contained, much more controllable. But ultimately, the body needs to feel emotion and for it to be felt fully. We actually don't need to feel emotion for that long for it to be felt properly. I can't remember the number now, but I think it's something like 7 to 13 minutes, something like that, is a kind of full range of an emotional experience that you can have, and it can be gone. It can be much quicker than that as well. But if you've got into a mode where you are not allowing your emotions at all, and you are just going straight to your thoughts, straight to the rational, then all of that emotion gets stored and stuck, and it comes out with back pain and neck pain and skin problems and IBS and etc., etc. It has to go somewhere. It has to go somewhere. It doesn't just not exist, right? If something sad happens, the sadness has to be felt, or else it comes out somewhere. Same with anger, same with frustration, all of the rest of it. But it makes sense that it feels too scary to feel your emotions. That makes complete sense. If you weren't shown as a child, when you were developing your relationship to your feelings, you weren't shown that it's perfectly okay, perfectly healthy, that nothing terrible happens when you feel angry, nothing terrible happens when you scream and cry, nothing terrible happens when you get cross and want to punch the pillows or whatever you might do, that it's okay to feel. But if you didn't get that validation, or also if you saw a parent who was highly emotional and for you that felt really frightening and really scary, which it does for a child when an adult is emotional in a way that they're not able to manage or regulate at all, then again, that's going to be sending the message that this is not okay and that life is better when I'm rational, when I'm not emotional. And that's when it clicks, and that's when the suppressing happens. And then the last personality trait I want to talk about is putting other people first. Now again, this is really praised. This is linked to being a good person. I'm using air quotes for those of you listening on the podcast, because in my opinion, there's no such thing as a good person. There's also no such thing as a bad person. There are people who do good things, people who do not so good things. And that's kind of it. But there's this idea that is often peddled of, you can be a good person, and in order to be a good person, you are incredibly thoughtful, you put other people before you. And there's really nothing wrong with helping people out and being supportive of people. But what I'm talking about here is when it is at your detriment, when it costs you in terms of your peace, your own mental health, your own emotional health. Maybe it just takes up time that you don't have that needs to be spent somewhere else. Maybe it's draining your energy. And so when this is happening, there will have been something going on in your dynamic, probably with a parent when you were growing up, in which you learned to put them first, and you learned that keeping them happy was a better experience for you. And keeping them happy gave you that lovely feedback of feeling seen, feeling valued, feeling helpful, feeling useful. This can happen a lot when a parent is emotionally unavailable. So when they are maybe really consumed with their own life, maybe they're really consumed with work, with their own problems, with even just like keeping the house, right? Like I've noticed I can really go into, I do work, but I'm at home a lot with my kids, and I can go off into like cooking. Like I love cooking, and I'm like, oh, well, I'm doing it for the kids, but actually my son wants me to play with him, or my daughter's asking me something and I'm kind of irritated and batting her away a bit because I'm trying to cook something. So it's like, this is not always happening, and all of these personality traits are not always happening because your parent is doing something really awful and monstrous. Sometimes that is happening, but sometimes it's very kind of normal stuff, but as parents we just get consumed with something else. And so a child learns that in order to get that attention that they need, in order to get that connection, they need to adapt what they're doing. They need to kind of step it up, if you like, and try to be extra helpful or polite or just kind of considerate. And actually, as children, you're kind of not meant to be that considerate. Like children are narcissistic, and they should be narcissistic in order to develop into adults who are not narcissistic. But when that doesn't happen, then it flips, and then children who are not at all self-obsessed, children who are always just thinking of others and thinking of their parents and thinking of other people's needs, they didn't get enough of what they needed. So then obviously as adults, then things can kind of reverse themselves, if you like. So this is just something to think about if you find yourself being drained by your interactions, by your relationships. If you reach a breaking point whereby you spend weeks and weeks putting yourself out for other people and putting them first consistently, and then you get to the point where you've got nothing left to give and you're irritable and you're snappy and you're resentful, then there's probably this pattern happening underneath, this kind of putting other people first thing that will likely have come from your childhood. Because there is also, it's worth thinking about kind of the fact that we are social beings and we naturally live in community with one another. So absolutely connection and support are really useful, but it needs to be a dual process, right? It needs to be that like you are being supported enough in order to support other people. But this personality type that can arise from emotionally immature parenting means that you don't put yourself in a position to be supported. And so you are there just, pouring from an empty cup, or, there are lots of kind of analogies for it. You are then supporting other people, you're putting other people first, but nobody's putting you first, really. And so then you're left with a deficit. So those are the three personality types or traits I wanted to talk to you about today. And of course, there's always scope for healing from anything, and healing any of these personality traits can absolutely be lessened, they can be kind of tweaked. You don't have to stop doing these things completely. And there is always a point in any process of healing and becoming more conscious and becoming more self-aware in which you have to decide, actually, is this something that is really important to me? Is this so much a part of my identity that I want to hold on to it or hold on to some of it? Go for it, that's fine, but you're doing it with awareness. But if you think to yourself, actually, I no longer want to be highly rational. I want to be able to feel more. I want to be able to break down when I need to break down, be sad when I need to, be depressed when I need to be angry when I need to be. Then you can absolutely do that bit by bit. Slowly you find ways to bring emotion into your life. You actively invite that. You actively reflect on how you think, how you feel, how you're feeling. You actively either meditate on that or just a little, just put it on your background on your phone. How am I feeling right now? What do I need right now? And all of that, then over time it will start to shift. If you know that you are prone to coping well with stress, but you don't want to anymore, just because you can doesn't mean that you have to, then you can absolutely start moving away from that bit by bit. You notice when you are kicking into that fifth gear, get used to noticing what that feels like, what that looks like, what you start doing when you're overriding, when there's that part of you that's saying, oh, I'm exhausted, I just need to rest, or I'm fed up of this, or I just want to do nothing. What's happening? What are you saying in response? How are you overriding that? And the more awareness you bring to that moment, then you'll be able to start acting differently. And I mean, I'm running through these kind of ways of healing quite quickly because I'll do an episode on each in much more detail. But I just want to leave you with this sense that really you can heal from these things. You know, you don't have to keep doing them just because they feel like they're who you are. And they're putting other people first. I mean, with this is really about that decision to disappoint people, to let people down, which can feel really uncomfortable. But then it's like, what's underneath? Why is that so uncomfortable? You know, thinking about what is it about letting people down that feels so difficult? What does that say about you? In your mind, does that say that you're a bad person? Are you a bad person? Does that even exist? Or, you know, what is it that would happen if you start putting people second? What is it that happens if you start prioritizing your own needs a bit more? Why is that so uncomfortable? And just kind of exploring around these areas. You know, we're just wanting to collect data, reflect, collect all the time, and then you'll bring more awareness. And once we have awareness, then we can make changes. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that's been useful for you, and you can pop in the comments or send me an email about any topics that you would like specifically for me to talk about, anything to do with childhood trauma or emotionally immature parenting. I could chat about all day, so just let me know if there's anything specific for you. Take care.